Good day. So today we will talk about classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, which is talked about in our major subject developmental psychology. So what is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is a type of learning that made a big impact to the school of thought in psychology, which is behaviorism. There are also other kind of conditioning, which is operant conditioning, but for today we will just only talk about classical conditioning and its founder Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. So, who is Ivan Pavlov? Ivan Pavlov is a Russian physiologist who found classical conditioning. He was born in Ryazan, Russia, and had a career in religion because his father was a village priest. After being inspired by the father of Russian physiology, he abandoned his religious career with his father. And so, Pavlov research further led to the development of behavior therapy techniques such as the flooding and desensitizing. Desensitizing is a form of reverse conditioning where an individual is gradually exposed to the cause of anxiety, while flooding is similar but the individual is exposed to the cause of anxiety in a prolonged and intense way. So let's get to the experiment, which is called the dog experiment, where the classical conditioning is found by Ivan Pavlov. This dog experiment was conducted by Ivan Pavlov himself, where it consists of the dog and the bell and the food. So in the dog experiment, there are three phases of it. The first one is the before conditioning, second is the during conditioning, and the third and the last one is the after conditioning. So let's start with the before conditioning. As you can see in the picture, there is a food and there is a dog. The food is the unconditioned stimulus and the dog salivating to the food is an unconditioned response. It is called the unconditioned response because it is the natural response of a dog when it sees a food to salivate. And unconditioned stimulus is called to the food because it is just the food and there's no variables affecting the salivating of the dog. For example, whenever we see a food, the food is considered the unconditioned stimulus, while we experiencing hunger when we see the food is the unconditioned response because it is naturally occurring to us to be hungry whenever we see food. So that's the explanation why it is called the unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. Still in the before conditioning, we can see that inside the circle there's a whistle and there's a dog, where the whistle is labeled as a neutral stimulus because it does not produce any response from the dog. The goal of this experiment is to make the dog salivate with the sound of the whistle or the metronome without the presence of the food. Here comes the phase of during conditioning. So during the conditioning, both the unconditioned stimulus and neutral stimulus will be merged and it will create the unconditioned response. So whenever the whistle or the bell is ringed, there will be the presence of the food after. And after that, when the dog sees the food, the dog will naturally salivate. So in this case, the dog will be continually conditioned. So what will happen is that the dog will naturally salivate with the sound of the bell because it expects a food after, even the food will not be presented after the ringing of the bell. So with the after conditioning, the whistle became the conditioned stimulus because it makes the dog salivate even without the presence of the food. Now, the salivating of the dog became the conditioned response because it responds to the sound of the bell and not to the presence of food, which is the unconditioned stimulus before. So both conditioned stimulus and conditioned response is both the result of the conditioning and it is not natural to occur. So that's why it is called conditioned stimulus and conditioned response. With that, we will try to find any examples in our everyday life where classical conditioning somehow applies. So, with the first example of us is where the parents hit their child. So, the hitting of the parent to the child is called the unconditioned stimulus, where the crying of the child is the unconditioned response. It is natural occurring because when a parent hits their child, the child tends to cry. So, it is called the unconditioned response. So, next, when a child sees a belt held by their parents, there will be no response because it's just a belt for the child. So the belt will be considered as a neutral stimulus. So that's all for the before conditioning. So the next one is during conditioning where the hitting of the parent will be merged with the belt where the parent will use the belt to hit the child. So, it will be the process of conditioning where the parent will use the belt to hit the child so that the child will be conditioned that once when they see the belt held by their parent, they will just cry. So the conditioning continues until the child cries even if the parent will not hit them with the belt. With that, the belt became the conditioned stimulus from its state being a neutral stimulus, and the crying became the conditioned response because it is now conditioned that the child will cry with the presence of the belt even if the parent will not hit them with the belt. So I have still two examples where classical conditioning somehow applies. So the next one is the phone notification ring, because whenever we hear a ring in our phones, we instantly check it. So when we're in a public crowd or place and we hear a ring, we tend to check our phones even if the ring does not come from our cell phone and it comes from other people's cell phones. And it somehow applies the classical conditioning where we are conditioned to check our cell phones if it rings, even though the ringing is not from our phone. So the last one is the for your assignment. So I'm really guilty about it and some of my friends. And whenever it happens in real life, I told them that to salivate because I associated the salivating of the dog with the bell with us packing our bags with the teacher saying for your assignment for the next meeting, like that. So whenever the teacher says that for your assignment next meeting, the students tend to pack their bags, not listen to the assignments given. So that is somehow a application of classical conditioning where even though the teacher will not yet dismiss the class, and when the teacher says for your assignment next meeting, the students tend to just pack their bags and be ready to be dismissed even though it is not yet dismissal time. So that's another example of how classical conditioning is applied or can be seen in our everyday life. So here are the sources from Simply Psychology, Very Well Mind, yourdictionary.com, courses.lumenlearning.com, and nobelprize.org. Thank you for listening to this discussion. So hope you learned something about classical conditioning, and if you've got time, you should research about the other types of conditioning, which is the operant conditioning, and other thoughts in psychology which affects our growth and development as individuals in this world. So hope you had a great day and goodbye.